Oh,
Hi, it's doing it split screen again.
yes, it is. I didn't get a notification that it was starting, so I had to go find it myself. So strange.
Weird. Huh.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I will make sure that it gets shared in a few places so that hopefully some people get notified.
I
I feel
know.
like Facebook algorithms are super extra weird this week. Like super extra weird.
Super extra. This is
Super extra.
our new
Huh, that's
compound
interesting.
adjective.
All right. So I will post the link in the event as well, just to make sure it ends up in all of the places since
Awesome.
there are no notifications.
I know.
Makes me really sad.
Very strange.
Yeah. So our topic this week is essentially market research. It's asking the right questions of the right people at the right time in the right way. Lots of rights.
Yes.
So we're going to dive into that a little bit today.
Hmm. And this is really helpful because none of us, as it turns out, are mind readers. And what we
Mm-mm.
think our people need and want is oftentimes a little off base. One of the things that we like to talk about is where, sort of like what you do, the crux of what you do may not actually be the entry point for the people in
Mm-hmm.
your audience. And they may be thinking they actually have sort of a different problem than you realize they have. So part of this is going to be digging in and figuring out how can you connect with your audience where they are right now in a way that feels appealing to them.
Yes, absolutely. So the start of that really is what questions are you already asking your people and how are you engaging with your people? And there are a lot of different ways to do this, right? So it depends a lot on the type of business we have, who we serve and how we serve them. So if you have a product-based business, you might go about this in a different way than a service-based business. Different types of service-based businesses may do different things, but I think there are some best practices that we as leaders can undertake to make sure that we are connected with our audience in multiple ways. So this isn't just about making sales, although that definitely is a piece of it. It's about having those relationships and those connections with people so that you can anticipate their needs and help fulfill them.
Yeah,
Hi, Amy.
exactly. Hey, Amy.
Hey,
Um,
Leanna.
yes. So I think one of the questions that you asked is what questions are you asking? So if you're not
Mm-hmm.
asking questions in the first place, like don't be like, I'm the worst person. It's okay. It's not a judgment. It's just an opportunity to start. And so when we were asking you guys about leadership qualities, what kept coming up over and over again was listening skills. So this is a great opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for you guys to implement those. I think we're really lucky in this entrepreneurial space online here where um, we are focused on relationships. We are focused on community. I think a lot of business owners feel like they're islands. They feel like they
Mm-hmm.
don't have they're in competition mode rather than cooperation mode. So I do think we have a leg up here. There's a positive mindset within this kind of community where we're open to listening. We're open to developing relationships. We're open to giving free value, right? We're open to these things, which can be super helpful. But I think for some reason, this audience research piece is something that really scares people and trips them up. And I think part of it is because it sounds bigger and scarier than it actually is.
Yeah, yeah, and I know we have some market research experts in here. I know Jennifer is one, if you're catching this on the replay. So some of you can maybe help to dispel that anxiety around market research better than maybe even we can, and we'd love to hear your take on it. But I know for me, for a while, market research felt, and the idea of knowing my audience in that way and like putting this kind of almost corporate-y sounding word of market research on it, I felt kind of resisty to it because I was like, hey, Rochelle, I was like, I want to know my audience individually. I want to have
Mm-hmm.
a relationship with each individual person, and I don't want to create these vast generalizations. But as your business grows, it gets harder and harder to know each individual person, right? So there's a balance that has to be struck there between knowing your audience on an individual basis and knowing them as a group.
Yeah. I think the other piece of resistance that a lot of people have to conducting market research and asking those questions is that like we feel like it's going to stifle our creativity somehow. You know, it's like we have a
Mm.
program or we have an idea, we have expertise, we know what you need, like this is what you need. And like we make a lot of assumptions, maybe based on our own past story or just sort of what sort of logically makes sense to us. As to like what our people need and what's going to resonate with them and
Mm-hmm.
what's going to be that bridge that we like to talk about between our idea and their need or like where they are right now. And a lot of times, well, we all know what they say about assumptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that it
True story.
necessarily is is that like negative, but it's certainly not as effective as actually doing the work, doing the
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's this tendency, especially for people who identify as multi-passionate or who just really want to stay in their zone of genius all of the time,
Yeah.
which is like definitely what that there's nothing wrong with that. And in some cases, that's where you want to be, depending on where your business is. But there's this tendency to do that thing where it's like, okay, well, my passion is this. I want to create this. Let me get stuck in content creation mode, create the thing before I know that I have a market for the thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we put the cart in front of the horse, and this becomes less of a problem, I think, as we grow, because as we grow, we build an audience, we get to know our audience better, hopefully, if we're asking the right questions, if we're talking to them enough, and we can outsource certain things so that we can stay in our zone of genius. But in certain phases, we're doing a lot of it. And it's really tempting to get that brilliant light bulb idea, go all in on the idea before waiting to see if it's an idea that's actually going to pan out.
Yeah, totally. So how to do this can be a little tricky. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I was reading a book that we're going to return to here in a few minutes. But there was sort of this evocative quote right at the beginning. This book, by the way, is Ask by Ryan Levesque. Um, he says, you cannot directly ask people what they want. So you can directly ask people what they want, but what he's saying is it's not going to be effective because what people think they want isn't necessarily what they actually want or what's going to compel them to buy. So that makes it a little extra tricky. And I think that's another reason why a lot of entrepreneurs hesitate to do this is because it seems hard and scary. And they don't know where to start. And everything they've tried doesn't seem effective.
Yeah, and I think it's even deeper than like they don't necessarily articulate what they want or don't want. I think like people, the thing that they want a lot of times doesn't exist yet, so they have a hard time putting it into words. There's another piece in that book where the famous Henry Ford attributed quote comes up where he says, like, if I had asked people what they want, they would have just said faster horses.
Yeah.
Because the idea of a car was not in their mind. So instead, you can flip it on its head and ask people what they don't want. Because people are really good at saying what they don't like, what they don't want. And so, okay, in that Henry Ford situation, people don't want to pick up after a horse's, crap all the time, or waste. Thank you. That was much more eloquent than me. Or to feed it, or it's kind of annoying that only one person can really ride a horse at a time. So then you can create a solution based off of those, what essentially become, sort of benefits. Like, I want to be able to have one horse take my whole family somewhere, or I want to be able to save money on grain, or whatever horses eat, alfalfa, hay. I should know this.
I should know this too.
I went to horse camp.
I live in Lake Town. Everybody who lives where I live is here because they want to be close to Albuquerque, but they want their horses. So yes, there's tidbit number one. Thank you for highlighting that, Rochelle. Ask what your audience doesn't want. So you'll hear a lot of the times. So just recently, for example, I posted a question in my personal page where I was saying, like, okay, if you were going on a in-person client retreat, like, what is the best goodie bag item you could imagine, or like what's the best one you've received? And what I probably should have said is, what is something you definitely don't want that you might sort of expect to be there? And fortunately, the wonderful James Ranson actually answered that question for me, which was really cool, right? Because he was like, well, I'll tell you what I don't want. And that like helped me see like, oh, wow, something that I just assumed everybody would want. Not the case. Not the case at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that was his initial reaction, was to flip the question.
Yeah.
And I think we do that a lot. So, like, if we say, okay, what movie do you want to see? You know, we want to go out to the movies tonight. What movie do you want to see? It's much easier, especially if there's several movies you want to see, to be like, well, I don't want to see this one. I don't want to see this one. And then you end up with your, like, few leftovers to choose from, and then you just have a crisis.
Well, like, I feel like I should probably use this when Josh and I are like, where do we want to go to dinner? Because then it's like, every option is open to me in all of Albuquerque. Or I could be like, what do we don't want? Okay, well, we don't really feel like Mexican food tonight, or we don't really feel like Indian food tonight. Oh, I know. We'll go get chicken, or I don't know, whatever. Right? So it's helpful.
Yeah. And so I think the other piece of it is tying back into this benefits conversation, because so the whole theme this week is knowing your audience. So to know your audience, it's not just about market research, although that's a big piece of it. It's also about just connecting with them and having connections on, you know, not just a superficial level when you can. So what can you do? And this is a question I ask myself pretty regularly. And it's just like, what can I do to understand the people I have in my audience a little bit better than I do now? And sometimes it's easy. It's like, Rochelle, I know you were mentioning you sometimes PM people and ask them for feedback and comments and just get a conversation started. Sometimes it's something a little harder, like me going to the 90-Day Year Conference, where I was around a lot of people who were in my audience and some who were an expansion of my network, but in a not necessarily super comfortable situation. So I think part of it is being willing to put ourselves out there to talk to our audience in ways that may not always come naturally to us.
Totally. Yeah. So that's sort of question number 2 for you guys. Not only A, how can you flip the script a little bit on the questions you're asking, but B, how can you create deeper relationships with the people who are in your audience? So one of the things that this is reminding me of, again, Rochelle, I'm just continuing to pick on you in a loving way, but I know you were asking recently, like, hey, this thing doesn't seem to fit my audience. Do I need to shift my audience? And part of the question is like, well, can you just meet them where they are right now, right? Maybe you don't actually have to like totally shift, but there's ways that you can speak to them and help them where they are right now. But there's no way to know that unless you have that deep relationship with them. So in your case, it's great that like you are creating those relationships. I know that like you know everybody in your mastermind super well. You take great care to know your clients, take great care to know the people who are in your community as well. So I think those are great practices, right? And then sometimes it does help to have kind of that other perspective and people to bounce ideas off of. But yeah, like if you know your audience pretty well, it may be that you don't actually have to up level or shift or change who it is you're serving. You may be able to just shift a little bit of your messaging around what you're doing. So
yeah. Oh, I like that. So I guess that's the other issue. Are you asking the right audience what they need, don't need? Yeah. So I think that's probably something a lot of people struggle with at more than once, at different perspectives. And it's usually around when there's like a micro shift happening in their messaging, when it's like, am I actually talking to the right people? And am I actually talking to them in the right way and getting the information that's actually going to be valuable for me as a leader and me as a business? And that's a hard question because I think a lot of it is very personal.
Yeah.
Some people like are super in it with their audiences. And some people are like, and I'm not trying to brag on product-based businesses because I know that some product-based businesses are very, very in it with their audience, but the nature of a product-based business allows you to kind of step back a little bit and look at the market as a whole a little bit more easily. So it might be easier to sort of pivot audiences, whereas when you're up in it with your audience and you're spending a lot of one-on-one time with them or in groups a lot with them, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the weeds. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, am I serving the right people to meet my goals, my financial goals, my personal goals, my business goals? And if not, do I need to change what I'm doing or who I'm talking to, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, and you know, this whole thing about product versus service, I mean, a lot of the businesses here represented in this group are service-based businesses, but we have a product side, right? Like we do too, where
Right.
we have DIY courses for sale, or
Mm-hmm.
like I know, for instance, speaking of 90 Day Year, Taylor Banks was there, right? So he has a service-based business, but he also has an e-commerce product-based business. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, like for him, there's a very clear indication, I would guess, when he's not speaking to his audience, because his sales start going like this pretty fast, because it's a bunch of just
Mm-hmm.
like ad driven small sales, right? Of like $50 and under a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Whereas for a business that is for like his consulting business on the other side of things, it may take a little longer for him to realize that there's a problem with that kind of
Mm-hmm.
messaging, because he's forming relationships and things sort of trickle in over time. And the sales cycle is much longer. So I think that's sort of part of it too, is like to be aware that like we could actually have a problem with our lack of research and knowing our audience before it actually sort of like manifests in the business in terms of like lack of revenue.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Rochelle says, exactly. Am I talking to the people who are following me right now or the people I want to attract without splitting myself down the middle and running two
Mm-hmm.
businesses at once? Yeah. So something interesting that kind of comes up for me around that, which is some conversations that Marie and I have been having lately, and we've had with a few of our clients at various points, is people will meet you where you want them to be if they are ready. So one of the things Marie and I have worked hard to do is to speak to our highest level client and trust that there are people in our audience who are not there yet. But there are either things that we offer that are for those people, or if they're sticking around and continuing to hang out with us, they're willing to at least consider themselves in that realm or able to get to that area or that place. So I don't think it's about splitting yourself in the middle and running two businesses at once. I think it's about one business that has different entry points, and your attention is focused on the one where you, like in our case, it's our highest level clients. So wherever you are focusing the most of your energy is where you're going to get the most output.
Right, right. This kind of reminds me of like a side story here, but I think it's a relevant lesson that I learned as a child. So if you've been hanging around us a while, you know that we're super nerds, and yes, trust. That's exactly where I'm going with this, Tanya. We both are in love with the children's book series Animorphs. One of the things that we love about this book series is that the authors really trust their young readers to be able to handle difficult conversations, or to be able to really, you know, read difficult words or whatever. Like they did write to, and I don't know if they did this consciously or not, but they wrote to their highest level reader, who again was, you know,
Mm-hmm.
10 years old, but who they just trusted these kids to
Yeah.
have the maturity to really think about it, to be able to process, to enjoy, to continue reading. And I think that's something that has become a deep value of ours too, is like
Yeah.
just trusting the people in my audience are where they need to be, trusting that like and that's happened right in this group, that like when we started talking about leadership,
Mm-hmm.
there've been people in this group who've come to us and said like, you know, I never thought of myself as a leader until you guys made me realize I could, and now I'm stepping into that role.
Yeah. And there are some people who, when we started talking about that, left or stopped
Yes.
participating as much in this group. And that's okay too. They didn't necessarily resonate with who we decided that we were speaking to specifically from that point forward. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is just what they internalized as where they are and where they want to be and where they want to spend their time. And it's on us not to take that personally and see that as something like, oh, they didn't rise to the occasion. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying the people who connect with our message, resonate with us, will rise if they feel like it's the right path for them. And that's where that trust comes in. We're trusting that the right people will stick around for us, for our goals, for your goals, and that bridge can be built.
Yeah. So Rochelle's comment here says, gotcha. So in my case, it would be content creation for the person who's ready to go and willing to implement now that they've got the answers. This actually reminds me of a conversation I literally just had with Kyle Wright. I think I saw you were watching, Kyle. So shout out to you guys. I do think there's still an opportunity for you to address objections, right, Rochelle? I do think there's still an opportunity for you to say, like, if somebody feels willing and ready, but they still have a few questions, or there's a few things that are still holding them back that feel maybe a little bit more superficial, but they kind of know in their gut they need to do the thing. You can definitely address those things, right? I don't think that is a setback at all. And in fact, it shows that you are cognizant of what's freaking them out, right? It shows that you're like sensitive to them. So I think that's a positive for sure. But yes, I think that's sort of the tactic that we take, at least if that's feeling resonant for you. Cool. Let us know. This is something that, we've had to do through trial and error. And that's why, a lot of our programs have shifted over the last few years, because we've been constantly sort of elevating the level of trust that we have in our audience.
Yeah. And, when we're talking about asking the right questions and having the right connection with our audience, sometimes there's a bit of an education piece there too. So to kind of go back to when we made the shift to talking about thought leadership, a lot of the people who initially said that they did not connect with that message then did connect to the message once we explained what we meant by thought leadership. And our definition came in part from the conversations we had had with past clients that allowed us to, develop what we saw as a thought leader, but we still had to explain to people what we meant by that so that they could be like, oh yeah, I totally fit that description, or I don't. That decision is theirs to make, but we have a responsibility to be really clear in what our definition is. And in fact, we changed the questions for entering our Facebook group right after we made the shift. So most of you probably haven't seen this because you've been in the group for a while, but one of the questions for people entering this Facebook group is, what is your definition of thought leadership? Because not only do we want to be teaching people our definition, we want to know what preconceptions people are coming into this community with so that we can speak to those too and make sure that they understand what that bridge looks like between what they may already think and where we're talking about the topic and what the similarities might be.
Exactly. So that goes back to that sort of, are you asking the right questions piece? But you're right, Rochelle, there is also are you asking the right people the right questions, which is what today's all about. So, okay, so now we've started off by talking about a question you can ask, which is, instead of saying, what do you want or what do you need, saying like, what do you definitely not want or need, and switching that around, because you're going to be able to get some really great feedback there. The next piece of that is examining your level of trust in your audience, seeing which part of your audience you're talking to, and then seeing what you can do to speak to the highest level clients that you could serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then moving forward from that, once you have those answers, once you have that information, having an action plan for them. So it's great to have information, right? It's great to know things. It's great to feel connected to your audience, but if we don't actually do something with that info, it's like you can get into content paralysis. You can also get into market research paralysis and spend all of this time getting to know your audience and then never actually taking action on it. So I think the next piece of this is, okay, great, you know your people. You know them intimately, you know them well, you're asking them questions. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think you're right. A lot of people, I have gotten stuck, just browsing Reddit to see what people are saying about this thing, or reading comments and blog posts, or what people are saying on Amazon review pages for books that are relevant to it. I've spent a lot of time putting together surveys and sending those out. And all of this is useful, right? And all of this is helpful. I've spent a lot of time on coffee chats with people, on research calls. It's great. It's useful. But at some point too, if we just kind of have a imperfect action, let's try this thing step, that means that we can continue to refine as we go. So yes, absolutely not allowing yourself to be paralyzed by the process of market research, to use it as a tool, not to neglect it or to forget that it's available to you, but then also not to feel like you have to have a full shiny 20-page report in order to make any action.
Right. Yeah. One of the big things that Todd Herman talked about the 90-day year was imperfect action. At some point, you just got to do it, and know that market research and knowing your audience and connecting with them doesn't stop when you start taking action. You can constantly revisit. In fact, it's probably a good idea to constantly revisit your audience and make sure that you are continuing to speak to them and making sure that your products and services as they evolve make sense for your audience, especially if your audience evolves too, because the people Maria and I are serving now are not the people we were serving 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And the growth that we have seen in our client base, in our audience, all of that could only happen from us intentionally knowing who we were talking to. And not perfectly, not by any means perfectly. It's been a process, but we were always open to listening and open to the conversations that sort of allowed us to pave the right pathways for us at any given time.
Right. So it is a mindset, it's a dual mindset between imperfect action, but also willingness to, and again, this keeps coming up around leadership, right? Like leave the ego at the door, say, yes, I'm a creative person, and yes, I have ideas, but like they could be wrong. They could not wrong, but like they're just not necessarily as resonant as possible with my audience. I could be making assumptions about them. Sorry. And so, sort of saying like, hey, it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask.
Yeah. And I love that you said leave your ego at the door, because I think here's another big thing. When how dare you? When we get super attached to something in our business, be it a program or a service or a product, we have a hard time taking criticism sometimes. At least, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for you guys watching. But let me know if you resonate with this. You spend a lot of time creating a program, putting something together. You have this great idea, and maybe it doesn't pan out the way you want, but you're still super attached to that idea. So that makes it hard sometimes to either take criticism or pivot or switch gears or even talk to your audience about what's working or what's not, because you want your thing to work.
Right.
But that's not how business works. Like, you have to be willing to be flexible. And as a leader, it's your job to be flexible enough that you are serving your people and not yourself.
So good. Yeah, and I think that really does have a greater potential, I think, to resonate in this kind of environment with the sort of, like I was saying before, I think we have a leg up in this kind of community where we are focused on cooperation and relationships and abundance, as opposed to everything is competition. So just tapping into that as you go through the process and trusting that your audience will respond when you speak to them at the highest level. So if you're looking for some specific tools, specific questions, and specific frameworks around audience research, Jessie, do you know of a resource that they could go to?
I do. Before I talk about that, though, real quick, there are resources right here in this group. So don't forget about that, too. There are people in here who market research is what they do, and they're good at it. So if you're looking for someone who specifically does market research, Jennifer is one of them. I know there are more, so pop your names in the comments. I'll tag Jennifer after this. But that is a piece of it, right? That is a piece, making sure that you have the right resources available to you. So one resource is people. So use the people in this group. This is what the community is for. The other resource that we're going to talk about is specifically the book that Marie just mentioned, Ask by Ryan Levesque, which, if you can hold up, mine's across the room. It's backwards right now, but you can, luckily it's a three-letter word, so you can read it. So the thing I love about this book is that it's really accessible, and it really is rooted in psychology and like the neuroscience behind how people think of things and how people think of questions and how they think of answers and their likes and their dislikes and things like that. So it's a very practical way of looking at market research that allows you to approach it in a not super scary, overwhelming sort of way, which is sort of how I felt when I first started with the market research stuff. I was like, I don't even know where to begin. This makes it easy to know where to begin.
Exactly. So, as you may have guessed, and many of you watching this are already members of the Intentional Leaders Book Club, but Jesse and I have decided to continue on with the book club as a recurring monthly program. Yes, whoop whoop is right. And so this is the next book we're going to be reading. This will be the book for May. It's not too long at all, very accessible read. And then this, for those of you guys who are already in the book club, I made a little housekeeping announcement in there earlier today about this, so you may want to check that out because it's relevant to you guys. But for everybody else who's here considering maybe joining, the book club was really imagined as a way to bring together entrepreneurial leaders who really are invested in learning. They're invested in improving themselves. They're invested in developing those leadership skills and to growing their business. And so we are reading a mix of books. The first book that we read last month has really been more about sort of personal development, personal sort of growth as a leader as it pertains to business and your life. This book is much more sort of directly actionable for your business. And we're going to be doing a mix of these types of books going forward. This is a recurring monthly membership, essentially. So if you join us for a year, you would get through 12 books. This is for somebody who either knows that they want to be a leader, or they want to tap into that, but that they are not, they're not reading right now, or they're reading a lot and they're not actually taking the time to implement what they're reading. So they're looking for a community, a group, a discussion group to come together and to help them actually implement the useful bits out of highly curated books that have been selected specifically to help them grow into their leadership shoes and to develop that thought leadership platform.
Yes, absolutely. And so since it's a monthly, there is no sort of term, so you don't have to join for a year at a time. It's, you know, each month it renews. You can leave anytime you want. You can join anytime you want. The book club does include the physical book, so we will mail it to you because of that. If you want to get in on May for the US, you need to join by the 20th. I think it's the 20th, right?
Yes.
It's the 20th. If you're in the US, you have to join by the 20th of April. If you're in Canada, it's a little tighter, or the UK or Europe or anything like that, because anywhere else, because Amazon just doesn't like you guys, I guess. I don't know. What's the date for our international folks? The 16th? The 16th.
Yes,
okay,
which is
so that's
Monday.
this upcoming Monday. So because this is a membership thing, the cart doesn't technically close, but if you decide to join after those dates, you won't really get the full experience until after the May session has started. So you'll be a little behind everyone else. So that's why those dates are really important for those of you considering the club.
Yes. So in terms of what you would actually get as a part of the club, if you join by those dates, you would get a physical copy of the book. Regardless, though, you will be getting a summary. So like a 2 to 3 page, we're just calling it our Cliff Notes, but it's like our summary of the book. So that way, A, if you aren't able to join in time to get the book, or B, if you kind of like want to know what's up before you start reading it, what to expect, or C, you fall a little bit behind in the reading and you still want to stay up on the discussions, you're able to do that. So we kind of just like boil it down to the essentials so that you can really get the ideas. You'll get a suggested reading schedule. So part of the reason we send everybody a copy of the book is so that we all have the same page numbers. So we can say, hey, read to this page by this date. And that way we're all sort of on this, at the same place at the same time. And that way the discussions are relevant to you. We're going to be coming in for a weekly live stream where we come in and discuss the reading for that week, why we selected it, what are sort of the biggest nuggets and takeaways from it. You'll also be getting access to a big group Zoom discussion at the end of the month where we can all come together just like a book club that you might join in your hometown and discuss the book all together as leaders.
Yes. So we're starting the conversation on market research here in this group today, this week, really, this whole week. But it's an important topic, and so that's why we decided to keep it going within the book club in the month of May. Out of sort of all of the topics that we're talking about in this free group, we wanted to dive even deeper into this market research because I think it's, in our experience, it's a point of frustration, contention, and confusion for a lot of people if they don't have a process down, if they haven't figured out what works for them. And so when we're talking about taking imperfect action and we're talking about moving forward in a way that makes sense and that allows us to grow and step into a leadership role, understanding your audience and being able to talk to your audience and form relationships, even as your business gets large enough that you can't necessarily have a one-on-one conversation with everybody, that is really important. And we really think that that's worth spending a month focusing on and really honing in on. So we're really grateful to have this book club space to do that, because we think that it's a really interesting conversation and a really important conversation to have. So we hope to see you in that book club for Ask as we go through the book and talk about even more ways that you can incorporate market research into your business. I posted the link in the comments. It's northstarmessaging.com/book club. And again, you have until the 20th if you're in the US, until the 16th if you are international.
Exactly. And it's not just that it's an important conversation, just sort of ethereally, but it's actually very effective. So I'll read you one more paragraph from this book. I'm going to show you in detail my Ask method. The same method my clients, customers, and I have used to quietly generate over 3 million leads and over 200,000 customers across 23 major markets in just the past several years, generating well over $100 million of revenue in the process. So it's also effective. It's also something that can make a difference to the bottom line of your business so that you really can continue serving your clients to the best of your capacity so that you can follow all of those creative ideas that you have because you have the cash flow and the revenue to support that. And so that you can truly develop your thought leadership platform because you have a successful, thriving business that actually gives people what they really want and need.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, that's what is most important. I think what really appeals to me most about this book is there are a lot of business books out there that are like, oh, well, we've had a lot of success using this framework or, that framework in our business. The fact that he's done it in so many different industries really is what sticks out to me more than the amount of money that's been made, more than the fact that it personally worked for him. But the fact that it's worked for clients, that it's a framework that can be adjusted by industry, because at the end of the day, none of us is going to do exactly what someone tells us to do. Like, that's just not how we're wired. We're going to take something and adapt it to us. So it's important that whatever frameworks are presented have a level of flexibility to them and have a level of adaptability to the way that you function, the way that you run your business, the way that you talk to your customers and clients. And so that's what appeals to me most about this method, is this idea that it is adaptable to multiple industries. This is a framework that has been used in product-based businesses, service-based businesses, big, huge, corporate firms, small businesses, solopreneurs, kind of across the board. So what that tells me immediately is that it is a very adaptable system. And that's super important for me because I don't like following the rules. I like making my own version and following that.
Exactly. And, we've had a number of our mentors and high-level connections who have very successful businesses really talking up this framework. And as we've been reading this book ourselves, we can definitely see why. So it is effective. Excited to dig in with you guys. And I think this is part of the purpose of the group, right? Is so that we can all say, okay, we're all going to zag a little bit from maybe the prescribed formula potentially, but this is how, here's some of the questions that are coming up. And here's how, I'm going to be implementing this in our group, and having that accountability and community to help us all implement this really important thing in our businesses. The one other feature that I totally forgot to mention earlier when I was listing them out was a weekly email that comes out with selected reading passages, as well as or like highlighted reading passages. So again, if you don't have time to read the whole book, this is designed so that you can finish it in 15 minutes of reading a day or less. But if you are traveling or you don't have time to read it all, just read these few pages here of selected passages and you'll be able to stay up on the conversation, and also journal prompts so that, again, you can ruminate a little bit more deeply on it and give yourself actionable steps to implement in your business. That's what the journal prompts are going to be moving you towards.
Yes, so we're super excited to dive into it. Of course, we're still in our April book right now, which we've been having a great time talking about with the people who are already in there. We're reading The Art of Possibility right now, and it's just been really great to have some conversations. That's more of a personal leaning development book, and there are a lot of great conversations there about how to shift our mindset, shift the way that we frame the world that we're living and working in, so that we can see success in a different way, not just be more successful, but reframe what success is. So totally. I think that the framework and the foundation for the book club that has been set up is really strong. We have an amazing group of people, so if you decide to join, you are going to be surrounded by some fabulous thought leaders and people who really are looking to not just talk about their business or their vision or their leadership, but actually take action, that exactly. Imperfect action.
Exactly. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. If you guys have questions specifically about your business, about market research as a whole, the book club, any of these things, just drop them in the comments. We'll be responding to them. Or you can always just reach out to us via PM. So there's no wall there.
You know where to find us.
Exactly. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Have a good day.